world of wine, we are met with a convergence of tradition with innovation, old world values and techniques, valuing generational traditions and art, as well as new world ideas, encapsulating collaboration and experimentation. Within this vast world of wine styles and grape varieties, an infinite combination of variables contribute towards creating and refining the liquid art form that we know as wine. I'd like to welcome you from all of us here at Shore Academy. Here at Shore, we aim to equip you with the practical skills and knowledge that will help you reach your goals and succeed today. Welcome to Lesson 7 in the second module of your Professional Diploma in Wine Appreciation. Today, we are going to learn about blending wine. My name is Julia Blaine. I am a qualified winemaker and your educator for this course. The objectives for today's lesson include listing the elements that form the structure of wine, and at the end of the lesson you will be able to explain the purpose of blending wine, and you'll be able to classify and discuss some of the traditional blends that have become international benchmarks in the wine industry. We learned in Module 1 that tasting wine more refers to our sense of smell than our sense of taste. When we are tasting wine, what we perceive on our palates is the physical sensation of the wine. In other words, the sweetness, the acidity, tannin, body, and alcohol. These terms are kind of measurements of the wine and can be backed up by looking at the chemical analysis. For example, if a wine tastes sweet, you can assume that it will have some residual sugar, and you can check this by evaluating the chemical analysis of the wine. So when we are tasting wine, our palates are actually measuring the wine. The natural way that our brains like to communicate our sensorial experience of wine is by describing the wine by its flavor, but a more useful way would be by describing and analyzing its structure. This is especially useful when it comes to assessing individual components that will be part of a wine blend. Before we get into the specifics of blending techniques, let us recap on the terminology used to describe the structure of wine. There are 5 structural elements that are evaluated in wine, and they are as follows: the sweetness, the acidity, the tannin, the body, and the alcohol. Let us take a closer look at each of these elements individually. Sweetness refers to the amount of residual sugar in wine. When measuring sweetness, one needs to consider the balance with acidity and other components in the wine. If the wine has virtually no sugar present, it is described as dry, which is the opposite of sweet in wine terminology. What makes sweetness a complicated structural element in wine is that if the wine is lacking in some department, let's say acidity for example, the wine can be perceived as sweet even though it's dry. This is why sweetness needs to be evaluated relative to the other structural elements. Acidity refers to the sourness of the wine. Imagine licking a lemon. The initial experience is very sour, and after that your mouth will proceed to water. So if a wine makes your mouth water, it probably has a very high acidity. Acidity is one of the most important structural characteristics of wine that determines the aging potential of a wine. A wine with a high acidity can be perceived as lighter or fresher, even if it is full-bodied and rich. Tannin is the mouth-puckering effect of the wine or the astringency. Tannins form the structure and the backbone of a wine in a very physical way, and wines that have high tannins normally age very well. A very tannic wine can be perceived as very dry and less fruity. So if you prefer fruity wines, a good rule of thumb is to look for wines that have lower tannins. The body refers to the mouthfeel or the weight of a wine. It is a physical sensation of the wine in your mouth, like touch. Alcohol is a huge contributor towards body in wine. In Module 1, we used milk as the analogy for body. Light-bodied is like skim milk, whereas full-bodied is like full cream, and medium-bodied somewhere in between the two. When describing a wine's body, instead of using words such as full, medium, or light, you can use words such as powerful, big, elegant, or easy drinking as descriptive terminology. We know that alcohol contributes greatly towards body, and higher alcohol wines are normally fuller bodied, whereas lower alcohol wines are normally lighter bodied. By now, we know that grape varieties are physiologically unique, and that because of this, there is some form of predictability when it comes to wine styles. For example, Pinot Noir is normally lighter bodied and less tannic than Cabernet Sauvignon because they differ with regard to the thickness of their grape skins and thereby the phenolic content of the wine. The sensorial journey of wine on your palate has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So by this, I mean that the taste of the wine changes from when it first makes contact with your taste buds until after you have swallowed, and each part of this journey can be described separately. The amount of time that the sensation of the wine lingers on your palate after you've taken a sip is defined as the length or the aftertaste of the wine. This sensorial journey or progression is an important element to note when evaluating wines and a valuable element to consider when assembling blends. Most wines are blends in some way or another, whether it be a blend of various barrels, various vineyard sites, grape varieties, or a blend of wine batches that were fermented separately. Blending is such a critical step in the winemaking process. When it comes to making the perfect blend, sometimes the winemaker can tinker for months before settling on the final composition. The main purpose of blending is to create a wine that is of the best quality and balance. Oftentimes, especially in commercial wineries, one of the main purpose of blending is to create consistency across vintages to meet the expectations of the consumer. Blending is considered an art, and it can take years for a winemaker to train and develop their palate and gain confidence. Vision is key, and the primary goal of a wine blend should be that the blend is greater than the individual components. Imagine an artist with a blank canvas in front of them and an array of colors in the color palette. In the context of winemaking, the end wine is the masterpiece, and the individual components are the colors. When working on a wine blend, one can be surprised to notice how something so small, maybe 1 to 2% of a contribution, can change the entire perception of the wine. One of the challenges that I have seen in my personal experience as a winemaker is to keep an open mind in the process. If the goal is to compile a wine that is balanced and delicious, then that goal needs to be stuck to. Oftentimes you develop favorites in the cellar, just like an artist might have a favorite color or medium to work with. If you are blending with favoritism in mind, you might struggle to remain objective and reach your goal. There are several ways that blends might be put together. Some blends are put together according to tradition, and others are compiled with no tradition or guidelines in mind, the only objective being to create a wine that is delicious and an expression of the winemaker's vision. Backblending is a term that is often used to describe the process of blending wines quite late in the winemaking process. This is often done to improve a wine. An example of this is adding wine that has some residual sugar to a wine that has maybe too high of an acidity to balance out the palate, or by adding some older wine to a young wine to add complexity. Balance is a word that is used a lot in the wine industry. Every winemaker and viticulturalist strive for balance both in the vines and in their wines. Vine balance is something that can be easily overlooked by the wine consumer. We know that the better the quality of the grapes, the higher your chances are of making a great quality wine, if all goes well in the fermentation process. A vine is considered well balanced when there is a good ratio between the vegetative and the reproductive growth. It is the responsibility of the viticulturist to ensure that the vines are well balanced and to employ any viticultural practices that might be necessary to restore or maintain balance in the vineyard. When it comes to wine, one analyzes the structural elements, which are the alcohol, acidity, tannin, and sweetness, to determine the balance. A balanced wine is one where no one of these elements stand out in an offensive or obtrusive way, but rather cohesively and in a harmonious way. Assemblage is the French word for the process of deciding which lots of wine will be included in the final blend. This is a very important part of sparkling wine production, with some premium sparkling wine producers assembling wines from more than 100 individual components. Assemblage of the Grand Vin wines in Bordeaux consists only of the top quality lots. Each lot of wine will be tasted and the winemaker will decide which lot will go where. The lots that don't make the cut for being the best either get blended into a second or a third label and get sold off to a negociant. Grand Vin wines are the premium wines and they also fetch a premium price, where the second or the third label is much cheaper. During assemblage, the winemaker will decide whether to incorporate the press fraction of the wine or not in the case of red wine assemblage. There are many reasons why wines might be blended together. The one, like previously mentioned, is because of tradition, and the other is because of compatibility in terms of style. As a rule of thumb, vines that grow together in similar climates normally blend well together. Over the years, some iconic wine regions in France have developed blends that have become global benchmarks. Let's take a look at some examples of classic, traditional, international blends. Bordeaux is a famous wine region in France, and we will discuss this region in detail when we pack our bags in Module 4 and go on our Wines of the World tour. In today's lesson, we will look at what a classic red and white Bordeaux blend is comprised of. More than 90% of the grapes that are planted in the Bordeaux region in France are red grapes. And of these, there are 5 main red grape varieties that make up a classic Bordeaux blend. The 5 red grape varieties that are permitted in a classic Bordeaux red blend are Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. Red Bordeaux blends are medium to full-bodied wines with primary flavors of blackcurrant, plums, violets, and earthy notes of graphite and cedar. These wines are normally quite high in the tannin department, which allows them to age very well. If you look at the 5 main varieties that we just mentioned that are used in the classic Bordeaux blends, then you will understand where this flavor and aroma profile comes from. Let's take a closer look at these varieties individually to better understand the character of the blend. Merlot is the most planted red grape variety in Bordeaux and typically displays characteristics of cherry, plum, mocha, and vanilla. Merlot contributes red fruit character to the blend, as well as soft, silky tannins. Cabernet Sauvignon is the world's most popular grape. Wines made from this grape variety are known to be very concentrated and age exceptionally well. Expect notes of black cherry, black currant, cedar, and graphite. Cabernet Sauvignon has a rich flavor and is full-bodied, and the large tannins from this grape variety contributes towards the body and the length of the blend as well as the texture. Cabernet Sauvignon can also display some herbal characters depending on the climate. An interesting fact about Cabernet Sauvignon is that the parents of this grape are Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc displays primary flavors of red fruits like strawberries and raspberries and can have notes of green pepper, bell pepper, and even chili pepper. Wines made from Cabernet Franc are medium-bodied with medium to high tannins. What makes this grape wonderful is its ability to adapt to several climates, and therefore various styles of wine can be made from it. A fun fact about Cabernet Franc is that it is not only the parent of Cabernet Sauvignon, but also of Merlot. This grape variety is loved for its deep, dark color and bold tannins. Petit Verdot is a bit of a contradiction because these wines are big and bold in body and color, but then on the palate it is delicate with elegant floral notes of violet, lilac, and sage. Dominant flavors found in Petit Verdot are black fruits like plum, blackberry, and black cherry. Because of this wine's high tannin structure and intensity, these wines are often aged in oak for the benefits of added vanilla and mocha characteristics that the oak can impart into the wine. Normally, Petit Verdot is added to the Bordeaux blends in very small percentages because of its intensity. Last but definitely not least, we have Malbec. If you like chocolate, then this grape variety is for you. Malbec is a full-bodied wine with a lower acidity and a medium tannin structure. This variety is very rich and fruity and smooth and has primary characteristics of plum, blackberry, tobacco, and chocolate or cocoa. Because Malbec is so smooth and highly fruity, it does not need to have as much oak aging when compared to a variety like Petit Verdot. Malbec works very well in the Bordeaux blend as it brings fullness to the mid-palate and loads of fruit. In the Bordeaux blend, these 5 varieties are put together in different ratios to make the perfect balanced wine. Something fun that you can try along with a group of wine appreciator friends is perhaps making your own version of a Bordeaux blend. Why don't you go out and purchase a bottle of these 5 individual grape varieties from the same region and play around with your own blending ratios and see if you can create your own Bordeaux blend. Even though Bordeaux is mainly known for their red blends, they do make a white blend there too. Seeing as how about 90% of the grapes that are planted in Bordeaux are red grapes, only a very small percentage of the wine production in the region is dedicated to white wine. The grape varieties that are used in white Bordeaux blends, or also known as Bordeaux Blanc, are Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. These blends can vary in style from light and fresh to rich and creamy. Bordeaux Blanc wines are light to medium bodied and normally have quite a prominent acidity, which adds to their great aging potential. In the light, fresh, and zesty style of Bordeaux Blanc, you can expect flavors and aromas of citrus, like lime and grapefruit, honey and jasmine, and some notes of green. Think chamomile or green pepper or grass. In the rich, ripe, and creamy style, you can expect flavors and aromas of citrus, like orange or mandarin, lemon curd, apple and ginger, with floral notes of chamomile as well. Let us take a closer look at the 2 grape varieties that make up this classic blend and which individual characteristics they bring to the table. Semillon is a grape variety that is characterized by its medium body, medium acidity, and primary characteristics of ripe citrus like lemon and orange, peach, and honey. Depending on the soil type, these wines can almost come across as salty. We have mentioned Sauvignon Blanc before in previous lessons, and this is a grape that I like to call the chameleon grape, as it really takes on its surroundings and can adapt well to various climates. This grape variety is well known and loved either for its zingy green character or zesty tropical notes. Primary aromas and flavors from this grape range from passion fruit, grapefruit and gooseberry to asparagus and freshly cut grass. I feel Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon are the perfect match. Sauvignon Blanc brings zingy acidity, notes of citrus and hints of green, while Semillon softens out the blend, brings weight and body and warmer notes of nuts and peaches. Sometimes either one of these grape varieties on the Bordeaux Blanc blends are fermented in oak barrels with extended lees contact, which can add to the complexity, richness, and texture of the wine, as well as notes of honey and nuts. Next up, we are moving to the south of France, to the Côte du Rhône region, where the famous GSM blend comes from. Today, this classic blend can be found all around the world. Can you guess which 3 grape varieties make up this famous red blend? The answer is Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre. The GSM blend has a primary flavor and aroma profile of red fruit, black fruit, herbs, spices, and some floral notes. Expect characteristics of raspberry and blackberry, rosemary, cinnamon, black pepper, and hints of lavender and violet. These wines are normally medium to full-bodied, have a medium tannin structure and a medium acidity. Before we dive deeper and discuss the three varieties that this famous blend is comprised of, let's take a look at what's coming up next in your final lesson of Module 2. We will discuss what happens to wine over time, and we will look into the time-traveling ability of wine. So let's take a look at the G in the GSM blend. Grenache is the lightest in color of the three varieties, but this wine definitely packs a punch when it comes to body, flavor, and alcohol. These grapes are normally picked quite ripe, so expect an alcohol percentage of 15% alcohol by volume or even higher. The primary flavor and aroma profile of Grenache includes red fruits like strawberries and plums, leather, and lots of spice. We have learned in previous lessons that grape varieties will display different characteristics depending on whether the grapes are grown in cool or warm climates. In this instance, expect the Syrah to display more black fruits and spice, indicating that the grapes are grown in a warmer climate. The primary flavor and aroma profile will include characteristics of the primary flavor and aroma profile includes blueberry, plum, tobacco, leather, spice, and some black pepper. Syrah can come across as quite savory, offering notes of black olive and even bacon. The Syrah that goes into the GSM blend are normally full-bodied, with full tannins and quite a big alcohol. Like the other two varieties, the M in the GSM blend is not a shy element. Mourvèdre is a full-bodied wine with huge tannins and a good acidity. This element forms the structure of the GSM blend and also contributes greatly to its aging ability. Like the Grenache and the Syrah, the Mourvèdre for the blend is picked fully ripe, so expect primary flavors and aromas of black fruits like blackberry and then loads of spice notes. Think black pepper, tobacco, and chocolate. Mourvèdre can also sometimes come across as savory or meaty and even have a gamey characteristic. Normally, Grenache makes up the majority of the GSM blend, and due to the high alcohol content, it contributes towards the great length that those wines possess. For the bold mid-palate, we lean on Syrah, and for the strong finish, we depend on the Mourvèdre. Can you remember from Lesson 8 in Module 1 what the three principal grape varieties are that are used in the Champagne blends? That's right, it's Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay. Let's take a closer look at what these three varieties contribute towards the traditional Champagne blend as individuals. Pinot Noir contributes structure and body to the blend, along with primary aromas and flavors of red fruits. Think strawberries and raspberries. Pinot Meunier contributes intense fruit and a fullness or a roundness to the palate. This variety matures the fastest of the three, so does not age particularly well. Lastly, we have Chardonnay. This variety contributes elegance, length, and finesse, and ages the best of the three varieties. When young, it can bring floral notes to the blend, and depending on the terroir, it can contribute beautiful minerality as well. Before sparkling wine is bottled and undergoes secondary fermentation, the head winemaker, sometimes referred to as the chef de cave, will taste all of the individual components of the base wine and compile the perfect blend. Blending base wines for sparkling wine production is a unique skill and requires a specially trained palate that is trained in the nuances and the long-term vision of the wine. This is because these base wines are not like regular wines. They have a very high zingy acidity, little to no fruit character, and low alcohol. So the winemaker needs to be able to see into the future and envision what the wine will taste like once it undergoes secondary alcoholic fermentation and develops its secondary and tertiary characteristics while maturing in the bottle on the lees. When assembling the perfect blend, The winemaker will taste the individual components and evaluate them on their color, aroma, and flavor profile. With these elements in mind, the winemaker will then compile a blend that is perfectly balanced. This is an opportunity to create a blend that is consistent with previous vintages, also known as the unique or distinctive house style, to meet the expectations of the consumer. For example, if you buy a bottle of champagne from a big, well-known brand, even though the wine is non-vintage, there is consistency in the flavor each time, no matter the year in which you have bought the wine. The variety of individual components that are evaluated for a champagne blend is vast and can include elements such as the grape variety, the vineyard origin and specifics, such as specifics within the vineyard site, the harvest date, whether or not the wine went through malolactic fermentation. One needs to consider oak influence, vintage, the pressing cycle, are you using the gentle press or the hard press fraction? And then finally, the specifics of the primary alcoholic fermentation. This can include elements such as fermentation vessel or which yeast strain you selected. These are only a few variables that I'm mentioning in today's lesson, but there can be many, many more. Did you know that the Bollinger Special Reserve Cuvée non-vintage is a blend of 240 different base wines? You might have heard the terms New World wine and Old World wine before. We will discuss these wine categories or classifications later in this course, but today I'd like to briefly introduce them to you in this lesson. In a nutshell, Old World winemaking and viticultural techniques rely more on tradition than the New World. Terroir is extremely important and a much respected element, and winemakers tend to rely more on geography than technique. Old World wine countries are mostly in Europe and include France, Germany, and Italy. In contrast, New World winemaking and viticulture rely more on science and technique than tradition. This does not mean that terroir and geography is not considered as important, as New World wine techniques come from Old World techniques. New World wine countries include the United States, South Africa, and New Zealand. The traditional blends that we have just discussed are all examples of Old World blends, and they are famous benchmarks that have inspired New World wine producers. With this being said, New World wine producers have some blends of their own. Let's take a look. New World wines are often classified as being fuller-bodied, higher alcohol, and more fruit-driven when compared to wines of the Old World. This is most likely attributed to the fact that the majority of climates of New World wine countries are a lot warmer than the Old World countries, which means the grapes are picked riper and at a higher sugar content. One type of blend that is quite popular in the New World is blending Syrah with Cabernet Sauvignon. This blend gained popularity in the 1970s in Australia, where Syrah is known as Shiraz. We know that traditionally Cabernet Sauvignon is known in the Bordeaux region in France, whereas Syrah is known in the more southern region of France, the Rhone Valley. This blend would most likely not be considered in France because of these geographical limitations, but in New World countries, the climate often allows for various grape varieties to grow alongside one another. The more forgiving climates allowed New World wine producers to grow a larger variety of grapes and experiment with some non-conventional blends. Some critics have named the Shiraz Cabernet blend as the Great Australian Red Blend. It is commonly referred to as Cab Shiraz. When it comes to the blend composition, the winemaker is free to decide on the proportions that produce the best balance. There is no rule that the blend needs to be Cabernet Sauvignon dominant or Shiraz dominant. Australian Shiraz tend to be full-bodied, with lots of ripe red and black fruits along with spice. Think blackberries, cassis, cherry tobacco, leather, and black pepper. Cabernet Sauvignon, similar to Shiraz, also tends to be fruitier than their Old World counterparts. Think flavors and aromas of black cherry, licorice, and spice. As a blend, these juicy fruit characters combine, creating a complex, fruit-forward wine that is full-bodied. Another form of blending is a field blend. As the name suggests, field blends are determined in the field or in the vineyard. This is where there are various types of grape varieties that are planted together. The grapes are then harvested all together on the same day, processed and fermented together. Many vineyards in the Old World were planted this way. By harvesting the grapes of different varieties all together on the same day, some grapes will naturally be riper than others. So in the end, you get some grapes that are picked for ripeness and fruit, and others perhaps for color, and a third for acidity and structure. Field blends are a creative and unique way to showcase a vineyard's terroir. In the Douro Valley in Portugal, field blends are a big part of the history of port production. There are up to 90 different grape varieties that are permitted in port production, and in the old days, vineyards were planted with a mixture of various grape varieties, red as well as white. Oftentimes, grape growers and winemakers didn't even know all of the varieties that they had planted. Today, most of the vineyard plantings are single varietal, but some field blends still exist. There is a movement in California and South Africa that embodies a spirit of collaboration and experimentation. The new generation of winemakers from New World wine regions are putting together unconventional blends, challenging wine norms and pushing boundaries. Blends are composed not because of tradition, but by what makes sense in terms of flavor and structure. The focus is put on making wines that are delicious and will give the wine appreciator a unique and memorable experience. Next time you're in a wine store, it might be worthwhile asking a wine shop assistant about this movement in the industry and try something completely different. For today's lesson challenge, I'd like to stick to tradition. Grab yourself a classic Bordeaux or GSM blend and let us know your thoughts in pictures or in words. Remember to use your wine tasting mat and flavor and aroma wheel that we designed for you here, especially at Shaw Academy, and tag us in social media using the hashtag ShawWine. Let's take a look at the 5 main skills that you are developing in this course. Firstly, tasting, including wine tasting, palate development, and identification and evaluation of wine faults. Next, we are learning to navigate the wine bottle, careers and terminology in the wine industry, as well as the elements of wine service. In the viticulture and oenology department, we have learned so far about primary alcoholic fermentation, secondary fermentation, and wine maturation, as well as viticultural practices. In this course, we will learn about principal wine styles, principal grape cultivars or varieties, and food and wine pairing. And lastly, we will study the wines of the world, including Old World wines, New World wines, which we introduced today, and innovation in the wine industry. This is just the tip of the iceberg, as in wine, one never stops learning. As in anything, but especially wine, I believe one learns best by doing. So keep on tasting and documenting your journey.